traits that I look at in particular are those that are most likely to be related to population growth from the very small levels you see at the beginning of most biological invasions. And those are the ones related to reproduction, life history traits. How they might support population growth in a biological invasion? Well, I did have a nice set of animation to illustrate this, but there was a bit of a PowerPoint fail 5 minutes before. So I'm just going to walk you through it. Imagine two species. Species A, which has traits that we think of as being very typical fast life history type traits, such as large clutches, frequent clutches, early age of maturity, so it starts reproducing quickly. But I thought there was a real meltdown for but it's early to mature, but it's short-lived because of this. Contrast that with a species that has a slower life history, reproduces less frequency, smaller clutches, etc. Well, they land on an island and begin reproducing. Species A is going to very quickly establish a large population that's going to avoid some of the extinction risks that very small populations face rapidly. Whereas species B is going to, because of its reproductive strategy, take a long time to grow a self-sustaining population. This is, so you might expect species A to have an advantage in invasions. And indeed, this is what classic life history theory of population growth from small populations would predict. More recent models, however, predict that species B has an advantage. Imagine if there was some event, say unfavourable weather conditions that prevented reproduction for a period, so there was a drought or something. Well, species A is short-lived, so it quickly starts dying out. And if the drought goes on long enough, then it might die out entirely before go extinct, before more favourable conditions return. Species B is able to weather the unfavourable conditions, and on the return of favourable conditions, it's able to begin reproducing again. And with the energy it's saved during the period of unfavourable conditions, maybe it can even invest more in its clutches. So it's a bet-hedging strategy of population growth from small populations. It suggests that the species with slow life history traits might actually do better. And indeed, there's some evidence for an advantage for slow birds to do better in biological invasions. In other taxa, it's much less clear. So this is what I look at. Do mammal, amphibian, and reptile life history traits predict the success of invasions? We take a phylogenetic comparative approach to this, so analysing large numbers of species, looking for systematic differences in invasion outcomes. And we examine all three classes at a global scale, so worldwide introductions, and we use the same analytical framework for all three to facilitate comparison of results. We had a real focus on building bigger and better databases of both invasion outcomes and also databases of species life histories. Importantly, we analysed the influence of life history at all three stages of the invasion pathway, from introduction of a species to a novel environment, through establishment of a self-sustaining population, through to spread to very large ranges and population sizes. And at each of these stages, species faces specific barriers. So it's important to compare the successful and unsuccessful species, not of the established species to all other species, but the species that successfully established to the species that failed to establish. So we have a binary response outcome, success or failure at each stage, and we're going to try and model that with multiple life history traits in a phylogenetic context. This is a data structure that's only recently been able to be analysed using MCMC-GLM, which allows for this structure of data by the specification of the appropriate priors. The life history traits we collected a large number of from primary and secondary sources, collating and updating to latest taxonomy. We collected those related to productivity, such as the litter size and weaning age, as well as those relating to the timing of reproductions, so the age of first reproduction, the reproductive lifespan. We tried to collect equivalent traits for each of the 3 taxa. So, for example, we collected information on neonatal body mass in mammals, hatchling mass in reptiles, and egg size in amphibians. There's some differences between the taxa in terms of the conventions of what data is typically reported. So unfortunately for amphibians in particular, we're missing clutch frequency. If anyone knows of any big sources of clutch frequency data for amphibians, please let me know. And ultimately we end up with samples that are present in the phylogenies that we have and which have all life history traits. Of 518 mammals, 414 reptiles, and 140 amphibians. Okay, so this is how I'm going to present all the results I discussed today. This is a stage of introduction analysis, so the comparison between the species that humans select either intentionally or unintentionally for introduction with all the species that have never been selected for introduction. We see here the posterior distribution of parameter estimates from the MCMC output, and we have as the criteria for success if 95% of the distribution crosses 0, this dashed line here, then we accept that predictor as being of importance in determining the outcome. So at this stage, successful introduction is more likely for amphibians when they have a small body size. So introduced amphibians have smaller body sizes. For the other life history traits, there's really remarkable consistency across the different taxa in terms of what characteristics we select for species to be introduced. So introduced species compared to other species have larger litters or clutches. For the classes where we had data, they also have more frequent clutches, as well as longer reproductive lifespans in all three classes. Before going on to discuss the results at establishments and spread, I just want to recap the theoretical predictions that this fast advantage model, the classic life history theory model, and the slow advantage model predict. They're opposite to one another. The classic model suggests that we should have success at establishment and spread to be associated with fast life history traits such as smaller hatchlings, larger clutches, more frequent clutches, as well as early maturity and shorter reproductive lifespan. Okay, this is the pattern of results at establishment in mammals. First I want to explain the introduction effort measure that we take. This is to account for the variation in establishment outcomes that we know is going to be there just because some species are introduced much more frequently than others. We observe this effect. Species introduced more frequently are more likely to establish. We observe this effect at both establishment and spread for all 3 classes, indicating we're effectively controlling for this right across our samples. So I'm not going to discuss that further. So once the traits that established mammals share, they have larger litters and longer reproductive lifespans, well, slightly weaker effect of longer reproductive lifespans. And then at spread, it's larger litters as well as more frequent litters as well. In the reptiles, the established reptiles have more frequent clutches, and in contrast to mammals, a shorter reproductive lifespan. And then at the stage of the spread, there's an effect of successfully spreading reptiles to have lighter hatchlings, and also the effect of shorter reproductive lifespan as well. So these effects that are found at both stages, we can think that establishment's already filtering the species with short reproductive lifespans. And then from amongst those species that already have short reproductive lifespans compared to all the introduced species, again those that go on to spread have especially In the amphibians, we see that the established species have large eggs, large clutches, and earlier age at sexual maturity. And then at spreads, there's a really strong effect of earlier sexual maturity as well. Right, here I just want to summarise the similarities and differences between taxa, the consistent introduction effort measured. There's a couple of patterns that have contrasting results. So in amphibians, it's collapsed across establishment and spread here. There weren't any opposite patterns at establishment and spread, so just to facilitate easy comparison of results, I've merged the effects at these stages. But we see some fairly consistent patterns in both mammals and amphibians towards successful species having larger clutches or litters, and in the mammals and reptiles, so both taxa on which we have data, to more frequent clutches. So, just want to quickly note here, so these are the introduction biases, and it's clear that in many, many cases we're actually introducing species that are likely to succeed, which certainly makes sense in terms of the species that we want to, that we introduce intentionally, that we want to establish or did want to establish at one point. Only in this one case is there an opposite effect of our introduction biases on what determines the outcome. So is the fast advantage model supported? In the mammals, there's a complex picture. So two strongest effects are both ones predicted by the fast advantage model, but there's also a weaker effect that's unexpected by this of longer reproductive lifespans. In the reptiles, there's a very consistent pattern of results that's consistent with the fast advantage model. But then again, in reptiles, it's a more complex pattern where larger hatchlings are selected for, not predicted by the fast advantage model, but the other important traits are both ones predicted by the fast advantage model. Just to wrap up very quickly, human introduction biases tend to select species are likely to establish and spread. In reptiles, the classic fast advantage model is strongly supported, whereas in amphibians and mammals, neither model is strongly supported. The most successful species are ones that possess a rather unusual combination of traits. Okay, thanks for listening. I might have time for questions.
We have 1 second.
1 second, sorry.